This week's Eldritch Lorecast, we are coming to you live from twitch.tv/Ghostfire_official. Or, of course, you can listen to us in all the usual places. We're talking about lots of stuff. I don't think this is a very good intro, so I'm going to give it one more go. Sorry. This week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, we are discussing what level is optimal for D&D 5e and something else. All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the number one podcast in all of the planes and the number one D&D podcast on Twitch. One day, I'm sure. We are now on Twitch, so hello to the Twitch chat. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am here, as always, with Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, Shawn Merwin. And Shawn, I have another question here from Gethin. Gethin wants to know, what level 20 character are you bringing to the Vecna D&D Beyond one-shot? If I was like, all right, we're running it right now, or we're running it hypothetically, next week, what character build are you bringing?
I want you to promise me we're running it next week before I give you my answer.
No. I don't want to make promises on your three's behalf.
The last level 20 adventure I ran, I played a monk, a 20th level monk, in Mr. James Introcasso's adventure, Planet of the Tarrasque. He did very well. This was a couple of years ago now. And for some reason, whatever I did worked perfectly for that adventure. I could fly. I could survive several bites from the Tarrasque. It just worked out very well. So that would be my go-to.
Were you monk the whole way through? There was no like multi-class shenanigans?
I am far too lazy to go get into multi-classing. So I just went straight, I believe it was a half-orc monk. And even the half-orc's ability to get up from one time per long rest from going to 0 hit points helped me in that sense.
You're right. That sounds like it was a difficult one-shot indeed if you were going down to 0.
Mm-hmm.
Dael Kingsmill, what character are you bringing? We've got a monk in the party.
I think I would go Abjuration Wizard. Just be really like heavy on control rather than damage for the most part. Really like to just be a nuisance to Vecna if I could.
Yeah, fair enough. It's the whole way wizard as well.
So yeah. I mean, mostly, again, because I'm too lazy to multi-class properly.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. James Hake, how about you? What are you bringing? We've got our wizard, we've got our monk, we've got martial, and we've got arcane covered. What are you bringing?
This is a vile question to ask someone who's always a DM, Ben. This is it's just mean. I would play a paladin, also straight one class, 20th level, and I would go into a subclass that is being developed for the project that Shawn and I are working on right this very instant.
Ooh.
It's something which I can't tell about, but which would be very, very helpful to have for the sake of my party members and helping them out in the cool stuff they're doing.
Don't tease me like that, James, because I happen to know, and I won't say, but I happen to know the project that you two are working on. And it is something that I like, were I at this company or not, this is something I would be super excited for. And I never even thought paladin. So the fact that you have said paladin.
This means that I'm the only one who doesn't know. Chat,
Dael.
I'm glad that Twitch chat is here today because now I'm not so alone.
You're the
this boys
audience
club
surrogate.
we're making here. This is exclusionary.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Also, terrible answer from me because if it were happening next week, there's no way I could bring this still under wraps.
Nobody
bit of the
says it'll
project
be.
to-
Nobody says
That's
it'll be
true, that's
live.
true.
Like,
Oh,
you know.
yeah.
Well, we need to play test some way or another.
There you go.
Ben, what are you bringing?
What am I bringing? Look, I would assume that I would GM if it was the four of us. So I'm gonna get out of jail free on that one. But honestly, I have no idea because the
Mr.
same as
Ben
James.
Yeah, very rude.
Well, you've chosen your characters. I similar to James. I just have no
Cheating.
idea like what level 20 does really. Like I'm at the moment working on the Monster Hunter class for the Ghostfire Gaming blog, and I'm up to writing levels. I think the next one is 9 to 14, and past level 10, I'm just like, what sort of abilities do like classes even have this high? I have no idea. The highest I've ever played was a one-shot at level 14, so not even the higher echelons of the higher tiers. And I don't know if I've told this story before, but I was infuriated because one dude brought a monk rogue multi-class, and I was like, all right, they're high level. I'm going to bring giants. It's going to be like Attack on Titan. Giants are going to be like eating the folks in the village, and they're going to have like a ground pound attack, and they're going to have like, Beast Titan style throw rocks and they kind of scatter everywhere area style attack. So there'll be armor class, there'll be saving throws. I'm going to have all my bases covered, ranged attacks, melee attacks. I'm going to make sure their flying can't stop them from taking damage. And I couldn't hurt this dude. I could not hurt him. He had evasion, so if he succeeded his save and his save DC on dexterity was through the roof, he took no damage and his AC was like 21, and I just there was nothing I could do to lay a finger on this dude. So that's kind of why I don't play at the upper echelons. But to ask a question that branches off of Gethin's initial question, James, how often have you played at the higher tiers? Have you ever played a 5th edition campaign that's gone from 1 to 20?
From 1 to 20, certainly not. I've GM'd a campaign, Princes of the Apocalypse, in which we went from 3 to 15, and then we did a 20th level one-shot kind of as a 1-year reunion later. But actual 1 to 20 full-on, no, it's never happened. I played some high-level one-shots, mostly conventions where one-shots are the norm. I was a part of a similar level 20s versus a Tarrasque at Origins a year or two before the pandemic hit, and that was pretty fun.
Do you have a sweet spot where you like to play and/or /GM in terms of levels?
I love 5 through 10. 5 through 10 is a beautiful place for 5th edition.
It really is, isn't it, Dael? I can see you.
I had a very strong physical reaction to that, and I don't think it needed to be that strong, but I was just like, as soon as you asked, I was like, well, it's levels 5 to 10. Even 6 to 10, I get so tired every time I have to make a character who's a lower level.
See, I enjoy the lower levels, but I get why players don't, because I have heard it said before, the game doesn't really unlock, doesn't really come online. The first 5 levels or the first 4 levels are really tutorial levels before you get all of your abilities and multi-attack unlocks and those 3rd level spells come into play.
And it's that fantasy of competence that we've talked about once or twice. It's like, I want to be good at things already. I have a question for Shawn, because I don't know how much design work you've done in terms of classes and subclasses and stuff, but Ben is right. It is super weird designing for higher levels, because I've found that you get to the point where you're like, oh, here's a really cool idea for like a high-powered thing that they can do. How do I make it so that it can be the level 14 ability rather than the level 20 ability? Because the level 20 ability has to be worse somehow. Do you have any insights on that kind of design work?
I don't, unfortunately, only because I don't think there is any insight. If you review a lot of the work that's been done, sometimes you'll read it and you'll say, I would never even use that ability, but it ends up being good. Or you think, oh, that's way too overpowered, but then in actual play, it isn't. And you really need to play something, especially at those higher levels, to realize how powerful they are or how weak they are. When you're reviewing on other podcasts where we're like going through a Unearthed Arcana subclass, we'll be like, and level 20, who cares? Whoever gets to level 20.
That's it.
you could say whatever. And by that time, it always depends on how the campaign has gone and how the characters have been built. Because if it's a low magic with limited options, it's going to be so much different than high magic, lots of magic items, and unlimited ability to draw from any resources. So at that point, the game sort of folds it up on itself.
I always
and you just
feel like
make
it's
the fun for your own group.
Yeah, I always feel like it's really funny in 5th edition when you're designing stuff for multiple classes at a time and you're like really working to balance the sort of high level stuff. and figure it out. And then you get to paladins, and they are the class that just gets something really cool at level 20 every time, no matter the subclass. You transform into an angel of light. Like it just becomes this huge thing. I'm like, why does no one else get that? I wonder if there were like other editions where it was a little bit more, I don't know, consistently structured.
I mean, did earlier editions, because 1 to 20, when you first start playing D&D 5e, as someone who came in from video games, and I was like, you can only get to level 20? That doesn't seem like a very high ceiling. That
this
feels
isn't
like
what Pokemon trained me for.
Yeah, exactly. But then, like, you never get above sort of 7th, 8th, 9th if you're playing in a long-term campaign. Maybe 13th, just based on James's work on Fables. 13th seems to be kind of the level where campaigns are expected to kind of teeter out, because...
Man, 6 is the level where campaigns are expected to peter out.
Yeah, okay,
13th is optimistic. It is naively hopeful.
What were the level scalings in earlier editions, and were parties expected to get to that godlike level that they are kind of above level 14 in 5e?
We can look at, I think, 2 distinct editions of D&D to get a really clear example of it. 4th edition is a great one, especially when it comes to Dael's question of were the levels more sort of uniformly balanced, because that was a key feature or drawback, depending on who you are, of 4th edition. A major focus of it, certainly, of level 1 up through level 30, with 10 level chunks of heroic, paragon, and then epic tiers of play. And another edition of D&D with which I have no experience but have read a fair bit about is BCMI, the basic, expert, something, master, immortal. What's the C? Does anyone know what the C in BCMI is?
I want to say companion. I want to say
like
communication.
But I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
Companion sounds about right. Which is, it's really 5 sort of micro editions of D&D kind of packaged together into one era of the game. Part of the game's like 0th edition, I think, basically.
Yeah, 1st and 2nd edition really didn't. There was such a disparity between the classes that it was even more pronounced than we're seeing in 5th edition. Because at least in 5th edition, if you're a fighter, you have these strange subclasses that you can take that give you powers. In previous editions, it was, you better hope you have a +5 Vorpal sword, friend, because otherwise your fighter is not going to be very fun to play at, past 14th, 15th level. Whereas the wizards are like, well, this round I'm going to wish, and then I'm going to time stop, and then, I'm going to change the fabric of reality. Whereas the rogue was like, well, I have an 80% chance to climb this wall for 20th level. So we're going to call that good. So we've definitely moved into the mechanic game design spheres that are at least more interesting and less disparate than it was in 1st and 2nd edition.
Sure. To go off at a sort of a bit of an odd angle and change topics slightly based on what you've said, though, I have to admit I should try, I believe, 1st and 2nd edition in terms of that disparateness, in terms of like, I don't know what edition it is, but my understanding is to become a paladin, you've got to start as a fighter and you have to be an elf and you need to multi-class into bard. You kind of have to alchemical your paladin together, which sounds cool to me. That sounds like a cool role-playing experience of like developing your character as you go along.
Paladins and druids in old editions were wild. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Shawn.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, what you're describing is actually a bard. In
right.
1st edition, you have to go through all these steps. The paladin, I think you needed a charisma of 17. So just rolling up the character, unless you rolled a certain number, you couldn't even play a paladin.
Right.
And so if you had a game master who said, well, you need to keep the rolls that you made for your character, you want to play a paladin? Sorry, you only got a 14 for charisma, so tough luck.
And I think if we run the odds on that, like 6 ability scores rolled in order, rolling a 17 is something like 1% on 3d6, and you divide that in 6 because you've rolled it in order. Then what are the odds of actually getting to play a paladin? Not good.
Right. Right. You had to actually say, I want to play a paladin. Please, Mr. Game Master. Can I do this? Yeah. If you tried to play first edition or even second edition now by the rules, second edition is a little easier. But if you tried to play first edition by the rules, you would not be able to. It would be impossible.
Okay.
Good review.
Yeah.
No,
it's like doing
it's just the truth.
I like the idea of like, even if you try to do a Shakespearean production in as true to Shakespeare as you possibly can, it's impossible. You couldn't possibly do it exactly how they did it back in the day. And tabletop role-playing games.
Nor should you want to.
How do we feel? I'm just curious what the fun was like back then in terms of the disparity, because I think of playing, and I did this in a one-shot, and I talked about this the other day at playing the Witcher role-playing game. Yes, I know. And the thing that struck me about that is that in 5e, all the classes functionally are even, right, in terms of their combat prowess largely. They all specialize slightly differently in different areas, but when it comes to a fight, when it comes to rolling for initiative, a hunter ranger gets a little bit more DPS at the earlier levels, but then that balances out a little bit at the later levels. Largely, when you roll for initiative, everybody participates. In the Witcher role-playing game, there's the man-at-arms, there's the sorceress, there's the Witcher, and I think those are the main kind of like fighty combat classes. And the bard is just a storyteller. Like they're just they're a Shakespearean bard. They just walk around and tell stories, and their strength is in convincing people that they should help the Witcher, toss a coin to their Witcher or whatever. The medic or the doctor, I think they're called, can't fight either. They're just there to stitch up injuries and things like that. And I was like, I found that really refreshing. But as folks that have probably played in that style of system more than is that unfun? Is that not fun for the table at large?
I haven't played in that kind of system.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I simply don't have any experience doing anything like that.
Not even from earlier editions?
So I've played some third edition. And I've been in the situation where eventually you reach the point where the wizard who levels sort of quadratically in power and the fighter who levels linearly in power, they diverge. And I've GM'd for that. And my only experience in a system like that, where everything is supposed to be balanced, but it doesn't really wind up that way, is that it's bad. It feels bad to prep games for, it feels bad to play in. Because, if you're a GM trying to challenge one player who's vastly above the others, then all of a sudden you've made challenges that only that one player can overcome. It's a disaster. For a system like the Witcher role-playing game, where there's a very intentional disparity between the classes as opposed to, the game just not functioning as intended. I'm really curious about that. I'd love to play in a system like the Witcher role-playing game that works that way.
Yeah, it was great. The doctor broke his wrist in the fight, and that was basically his participation.
Great.
Cool.
Nice.
Sure, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that first edition isn't really as dramatically imbalanced, in terms of the roles as Witcher sounds. It was just over the length of the campaign, everyone got to shine, but they weren't all shining at the same time, right? At low levels, it was hide the wizard in a bag so no one can see him, so he can get to 5th level, get fireball, and then will become useful.
I've read that fairy
sort
tale.
of switches. Yeah, exactly. And then it sort of switches at higher levels where it's, the fighters are out front, but it's the wizard who's protecting them from these greater threats using the magic. So there's something for everyone. You just have to play a full campaign to get there. Yeah. It doesn't happen all within the same game.
1 to 20, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, speaking of disparities in systems, there's going to be a disparity between the edited version and the streamed version. I just wanted to reiterate for folks who are listening to this after the fact, if you want to come hang out on Twitch, we are streaming. Last week, to my great embarrassment, we forgot to mention the day. We mentioned the times, but we didn't mention the day. So congratulations,
Pick a day, any
everybody.
day.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations, everybody who solved the D&D style puzzle of squirreling through.
It was
social
deliberate.
Media. It was the plan.
Only the worthy may watch us on Twitch.
So it is Monday, 7 p.m. Pacific. No, the other way around. Sorry. Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific, and Tuesday, 9 a.m. Australian. And I don't know any other time zones outside of that, but come hang out on Twitch. The chat's popping off. We may take some questions from there if folks have questions. But quickly, the one other quick news I wanted to get to, we mentioned it quickly last week while the Kickstarter was still happening. Now the Kickstarter has closed. It has raised 530,000 total raised for Aurora Age of Desolation. Shawn, I will ask you again how you're feeling this week.
So grateful, so overwhelmed, so proud of not just the Ghostfire gaming team, who are amazing creators in their own fields, whether it be marketing or products or game design, but also thanks to the freelance team. Many fine people toiled on the realms and then the new game mechanics. And thank you to all the backers. Even if you couldn't give money to back, if you spread the word, we totally appreciate that. And we look forward to making the finest, horrific, apocalyptic role-playing game that we possibly can for you. So thank you.
And thank you to the sculptors who sculpted those miniatures, because they're incredible. I don't have them because I'm in my house today, and you're going to see me dodging to the right as I avoid the sun. But yes, thank you so much to everybody who backed. It was incredible to watch, and I'm so happy for you, Shawn, that went so well. Yeah. Speaking of things going well, Gethin has a question and Luke has a question. And just quickly, Gethin, please never apologize for sending through emails. I love our weekly almost back and forth. Gethin's question was basically asking, and I think this was sort of a hypothetical, whether the ability to write creatively, write narrative stories, generate characters, is better for an RPG developer, or developing mechanics, interesting rules, engaging gameplay, which is kind of the better skill for a developer to have. And Gethin kind of acknowledges that both, or the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, or different people specialize in different stuff. But just before I bat that over to the three of you, I wanted to follow up with Luke's question, who was also asking kind of along the similar lines, if there are any good game development resources, books, articles, classes, YouTube channels for folks who are looking at developing their own systems, whether it's just doing a bit of homebrew, or whether it's just, they're actually looking at breaking in as a freelancer or something like that. I'm going to throw that over to the three of you, and then I'm going to close my blind, and Dante can edit me leaving the frame out.
That's what you think. He's actually going to have you solo on the screen as you get up and move out of frame and all the sunlight. Yeah, perfect. Right there. Thank you, Dante, for doing that. Thank you ahead of time.
All of a sudden the dog pops into the chair. We're all set.
Yeah. It's just Ben's replacement. Yeah. I am going to very lightly plant my flag on the side of the scale that is mechanical, I think, because I think there's only so far you can get in terms of tabletop RPG development before you hit a mechanic. Otherwise, it's a storytelling game, which is still a good thing. But, it is fairly necessary for the tabletop RPG genre that there is some kind of engagement with a mechanical element. But yeah, no, I do agree that it's going to be somewhere in the middle. As far as resources, I'm trying to think, because I must have so many of them. I definitely recommend Rob Donahue, he's with Evil Hat, isn't he? I think that's true. I could be lying to you, but Rob, thank you, Shawn. Rob Donohue's Twitter. Rob, like, fairly regularly will have these threads that just give you like invaluable design insight, where he just kind of breaks down a mechanic and what it does, what the effect of it is, and like very sort of even-handed. It's rarely like, this is a bad mechanic. It's usually, this is what this mechanic does, and this is where it will hit problems, and how it will clash with certain moods and, you know, help others. I also recommend, on the story side of things, I think The Alexandrian is a blog that's really, really helpful in terms of sort of planning adventure design, and a lot of the stuff that you find there can kind of be extrapolated to other uses. So those are probably my two immediate thoughts of go-tos for design sort of inspo and help. The pointing.
Shawn agrees. Officially.
Yeah. I was going to tell James to go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would read anything by Shawn Merwin, who is a fantastic game developer and has written much about it. In fact, we worked together, I as editor and him as writer, on a great series on D&D Beyond, a 10, I think, article a series about designing combat encounters for D&D. And I mean, Shawn, you can remind me and other folks of where your other writings and wisdoms can be found on the internet. So there's my answer on like wisdom. My answer on skill set is I was having a conversation with a former Wizards developer over lunch a couple of weeks ago, and we were marveling at the fact that in video games, development roles are all very highly specialized. A person who's designing the way guns work in their shooter would never set foot in the story development room for that game. Everyone has the thing they're working on, and it's very specific to their role. Whereas in game development, in tabletop game development, everyone has to be sort of a dilettante, especially if you're an indie, especially if you're doing it all on your own. But even if you're working at the highest levels of the game, at Wizards, at Ghostfire Gaming, it's impossible to hyper specialize. So I have almost a non-answer for the question. Is you really have to be good at both until our industry evolves such that there's enough games making money from enough studios that people can afford to specialize. Then you should practice both, and there's no reason to neglect one over the other.
I think that James and Dael both were spot on with everything they said. This is my hot take of 2022. It's that role-playing games do not require great storytelling skills. And in fact, sometimes they're even hampered by great storytelling skills. Why is that? It's because you are not creating a story. You are facilitating a story being told. So while it is super valuable to understand what goes into a good story, it's not incumbent upon you as the game designer to tell the story. You want to set up a framework, whether it's an adventure or a role-playing game system, into which players and game masters can pour their own stories. So as much as I love to see designers come in with MFAs in creative writing and, know all the texts and all those things, that's very valuable, but it's not where the crux of the game design takes place. As Dael said, you're going to come up against mechanics at some point, whether it's game design for the player side or game design for the DM to run your adventure. And you want to get your storytelling ego out of the way and let yourself build a framework that will be filled in. That's the best I can come up with. And in terms of what resources, let's put it this way: if you want to be a playwright, what do? You read plays. If you want to be a novelist, what should you do? You should read novels. If you want to be a musician, you should read music. If you want to be a game designer, you should be reading games. You should go out and read every sort of game, role-playing game that's out there. Play it if you can, but at least read it and try to understand, why does this speak to people? What is going to be the outcome of this product? And when you can get to the point where you can start with the very simplest game and see what the mechanics are and why they work together, then you are building your way up toward the more complex games, and you'll be right as rain.
This is everyone. This is such an insight. Shawn is exactly the person to take this advice from. He teaches a class on it. Please take the advice.
Well, I was going to ask Shawn, not that I assume it's open to anyone and everyone, but I was wondering whether your class is, because I know it's through a university, and I don't know how many personal details you want to give away if it's kind of tied to your other work.
Give us your address, Shawn.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just ask this one question, which I think you can answer vaguely, and you don't have to answer if you don't want, but is the class in person on campus, or is it a digital class that's online?
It's in person on campus. 20 some students. We sit down and we do what I just said. We start with interactive fiction, because what is role-playing games but telling a story and letting someone else run through that story and create their own. And then we do that. We work our way from single person sort of journaling games, one page games, fiasco, lasers and feelings, and then we get into Fate Accelerated and so on and so on. So that's exactly what we do. We say, how does this game work? Why would people like to play it? If you were going to make a version of this game, what would you do? How would you do it?
Speaking of mechanical questions, another question that I just thought was hilarious came in from George, which is fundamentally, why do people hate/nerf goodberry? Which when I received this, I thought was hilarious, because I hate/nerf goodberry because it is a hack into the game. It's just like, I don't want to have to worry about feeding myself. Goodberry. Shawn, how do you feel about goodberry? Is this good design to you? Is this, I assume you're not going to say it's terrible design.
It's a problematic spell for many reasons. The first reason is because what you're talking about. If you would like to run a game that's survival based, here is a first level spell that removes any need for going out and hunting. So in that sense, it cuts off a portion of the game that people might want to invest themselves in. But it's also it's not a great spell because it's a first level spell that will heal 10 hit points. Then there are certain feats. I don't remember if it's a feat or some other ability that lets you add your wisdom modifier to any healing spell. So not just is it here's 1 hit point, it's here's 1 + 3 or 1 + 4 hit points that you can give out 10 times. In combat, right? If you roll a natural 20 on a death save, you get up at 1 hit point. Well, what you've just done is you've handed out 10 ways to have people roll a natural 20 on their death save if someone feeds them a goodberry, taking away that need to use a healing potion or use a medicine check. So it's a very powerful first level spell, not even considering the survival aspect of it.
I just like that the chat exploded as soon as we mentioned goodberry. Yeah. And Shawn, you've already touched on the cleric question a little bit of like, if a cleric casts goodberry or if a cleric feeds someone using all their extra cleric abilities. Sorry, Dael, what were you going to say?
I was just going to point out, chat, as well. I like Penned by Ben has pointed out what I was going to say, which is that Zbashu has a video about goodberry where he suggests a very elegant fix to the problem, which isn't to get rid of the spell. It's not to change the spell, ban it, anything like that. Just change it so that the mistletoe sprig, which is a material component, is consumed when you use the spell, right? So then you've got this idea that it's like, you can still put the emphasis back on, a survival game, an exploration heavy game. But, if you want to use goodberry, you have to go and you have to find the mistletoe for it, which I think is very, it's good. It's simple and it works.
I love the idea of, I've run Tomb of Annihilation a couple times and had goodberry impact that game. I'll use that word. And I love the idea of like, no, you got to go find the mistletoe, which famously grows in jungles. where it's everywhere.
It's everywhere in jungles. Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's so associated with Christmas.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know. I think the thing for me that rubs me the wrong way about Goodberry, because I am on that train as well, is that I am fine with spells existing that let you kind of shortcut stuff. You know, like you've got your tiny huts and your mansions that you can summon, and you can avoid having to, you know, keep watch around the fire at night. But those are higher level spells. You have to play through the game a little bit before you access them. Whereas, what was that face?
Is like Tiny Hut, it's third, is it? Because I feel like Tiny Hut's around constant. It's second. Yeah,
it's second.
That's what I thought.
That's still higher than one, Ben.
Oh, okay. You're
2 is higher than
twice,
1.
Maybe. Yeah, Tiny Hut is my
That's
like
2 whole levels.
Goodberry, Tiny
Fight
Hut,
me.
Spirit Guardians, my 3 just like rage button spells. Spirit Guardians, it's not its fault. It's just
Okay, so it turns out that I am much more zen about this question than Ben is.
Yeah, I'm not as much of a fan of spells that allow you to kind of quote unquote hack the game and get around a certain danger or a certain aspect of the game. And it's not because I'm going for like realism, but rather a sense of like, I guess I hate the idea of like one tool for every job. And I think that sounds a bit weird because Goodberry and Lehman's Tiny Hut do specific things. But what I mean by that is just like an easy out, kind of like we don't have to worry about this thing. And Lehman's Tiny Hut also leads to this weird in the early levels, because it is only a 2nd level spell. Thank you, James. Now I get to complain about that. I
might be wrong about that. I wasn't looking.
Oh, it is 3rd. Sure. Yeah. Or Shawn's just flashing me a 3 to confuse the conversation.
It's 5.
I will believe whatever the last hand signal I am given, that is what I will believe. Okay, so it's a 5th level spell, so it's not that much of a problem because I don't get it until later on.
I know, a birth level spell.
But it leads to like situations where the party are like, all right, we have fought our way through his dungeon. There's this big skull-shaped door. All we have to do is push it open, and there will be the big boss. Oh, I don't have my highest level spell anymore. Yeah, I'm a little bit hurt. All right, let's just Lehman's Tiny Hut right on their doorstep, and get in a long rest.
That is true. I hate that.
It just creates
the pacing. God,
yeah, exactly, and the narrative, like the narrative verisimilitude, to use that term, is kind of gone as well. Because like I remember they did it in the middle of a bandit cave once, and I was like, all right, the bandits rock up and they like surround you and they're going to just wait for you to come out because now you're trapped you've kind of squirreled your way into there. And the party were like, yeah, that's fine. 8-hour rest, get all their stuff back, and they just blitz the room immediately after. And I was like, oh yeah, I should have thought of that. Damn. Are there any other similar? Am I on my own here, James? Do you have any greatly disliked spells, or are you more zen than even I or Dael?
The thing is, the campaign I'm currently playing in is bad for my hatred of spells because I don't have any really power gamey spellcasters. Both of the spellcasters are people who aren't superly mechanically invested. Like, they pick good spells, but they aren't seeking a powerful exploit all of the time, which honestly that's how I like to play D&D. We just like to have fun, and a little bit of tactical thinking is good, but we don't have to be constantly looking for overpowered combos. And so for that reason, I'm very zen about the whole thing, just because I haven't had any moments in recent memory where I can feel like, there is a game design shaped knife sticking into my side. Like, I get this out of here. No.
I don't know. I have that thing ringing in my head that, if given the opportunity, players are prone to optimizing the fun out of a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben is saying something and he is muted.
Sorry, I'm muted so I didn't cough into the microphone. As somebody who GMs 90% of the time, 95% of the time, and I get frustrated at player optimization when it's kind of taken to the nth degree. As soon as I'm on the other side of the GM screen, I'm like, oh, but if I do this, then I can get this bonus even higher, you know? Like if I'm playing an archer and I don't have minimum, like a +7 to hit at level 1, I'm like, nah, this build is all wrong. Like I need to fix this somehow. So I get it. I get that impulse, if you will. I do like the idea. I'm just trying to find the comment one more time because it has been moving the chat. Somebody said,
"Yeah, you heard it. You heard it here first. Chat is bumping. All right,
Chat's
popular. Come hang out
in chat."
Somebody said, and I will try to find it to, I believe it was penned by Ben again, which is not me, FYI, is the idea of tiny huts being tied to a campfire. I'm just trying to see if they were the original one who brought it. Anyway, if it's tied to a campfire, I like that idea. Maybe that's the ritual to cast it, is you've got to build a campfire. I probably wouldn't be so didactic to the players in terms of describing their spell, but I like the idea that like tiny hut doesn't become concentration because then they can't go to sleep, but has something to it that means you still need somebody on watch, whether it's like still on watch to keep the fire going or still on watch to like, I don't know, ensure somebody doesn't burrow up out of the ground. Does tiny hut have a flaw? I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm looking for your answer.
Where's the weakness? Where's the drain in Helm's Deep's wall?
Yeah, exactly.
Does anyone have
how fun would it be if it didn't have a floor?
Yeah.
I love that being an exploitable weakness, and also a good use for the underused monsters which have a burrowing speed as well.
Very much.
The one other trick I played on my players once when they tried to tiny hut in a desert was I buried them. There was a sandstorm, and if they popped the hut, it would just cause the sand to collapse down on top of them. So they had to
that's fun.
Figure out a safe way out.
I like that. This is not relevant, but I did remember it from the last conversation just now. A resource that I should have mentioned for people who are mathematically challenged, like myself, who want to get into tabletop RPG design stuff. Anydice.com is just absolutely invaluable. It is the greatest website of all time.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, helps with the dice maths.
Yep, it helps you determine probabilities for various numbers and shapes of dice. Very, very good for the spreadsheety part of this job.
I am legitimately writing that down as we speak so that I do not forget.
You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, that sounds very helpful because I've been like crafting different things before and been like, is that too powerful? Is it not? I guess we'll never know until it gets play tested, but at least now I can get an idea.
Yes.
In actuality. What are we looking at? Yes, we've got time for one more question. This comes from Brian. Brian asks about, this was a huge email, actually. This is a couple of months old as well, so I apologize to Brian for only getting to it just now. I won't read the whole thing because, as I mentioned, it is quite long and kind of ties back to a conversation we had maybe 10 episodes ago about, I know you'll all remember it perfectly well, about using role-playing games to teach morality, particularly to children. And the thrust, if I can remember it correctly, of Brian's kind of the body of their email was that we were right to sort of be a bit hesitant in our answers, and that it can, but it shouldn't be didactic. And also there is a level of moral escapism in playing games. The ability, I was playing God of War last night. The ability to just run around and pull wolves apart and not feel bad about it. Was that a weird way of phrasing that?
No, I mean, at a certain point, it's the only way you can phrase it at a certain point. I just got flashbacks to Ragnarok, that's all.
Right, okay, cool. No, easy.
Flash forwards?
Yes, thank you. We are always right about everything we say, and you're right to recognize that.
Yeah.
Brian's question is, how morally loaded and complex do you like to run your campaigns? And how do you balance that escapism inherent in the game with the opportunities to explore morality? How much do you judge your players? No, that's a simplification.
I judge my players plenty, but that's a different
Sure.
separate.
fair
I'm
enough.
just judgmental. I don't know. I like to keep it. I like to throw in a light sort of trolley problem-esque situation every now and then. Not maybe quite so intense as a trolley problem, but it's like early on in my sort of main campaign, there was a dying man who gave a ring to the party and said, could you take this to my husband's grave and bury it with him? But the ring gave them fireball early. And the player who was wearing the ring to carry it around loved it. I was like, I'm going to give you a bunch of power right now, with the knowledge that it's intended to be temporary. I didn't say any of this at the time, of course. And then, watch what happens when they actually get to the grave. Do they give it up or do they not? And, I either way was going to be a reward, right? You keep the ring and you keep your fireball. But if they give it back, I personally had decided to sort of refill the coffers with a different magic item that was, maybe not quite as splody, but certainly cool and fun. And it's nice to have those situations. I like to not punish them for their moral choices, but just, observe. Just observe. I want you to get a reward either way, but I find it interesting that you have to make a choice.
I love despicable characters. I love player characters that are that have got problems. Because this is a story. We get to tell stories about all sorts of people. And the only time when I take issue in sort of moral reprehensibility among my player characters, there's two cases. One, when it interferes with party cohesion, with our sort of social contract to sit around and play a game together. And two, when it interferes with the lines and veils drawn by my players set in session 0. Also a part of the social contract necessary for us to play a game together. And that's it. If it interrupts our ability to have fun as friends, then we need to find another option. But otherwise, open season, bad characters are so interesting. Flawed characters are so fun. And the interaction between characters whose ideals clash that's the stuff that stories are made of. I love that stuff.
Shawn, how about you? What moral complexity do you play your games with? Level of moral complexity.
The home group that I play with, the players are morally reprehensible. And notice I didn't say the characters are.
The players, yes. Yeah.
Adding
smelly too, if you remember.
Yes. Adding any sort of moral component to the game, they are going to smash it just for the fun of smashing it. Right. It is a beer and pretzels game without many pretzels. Now, bringing the moral. Here's a good way of putting it. If you write a story and the morality play of the story overpowers the actual narrative of caring what happens to the characters, you're writing propaganda. You're not writing a story. And that's what I worry about in terms of game design, is like making an adventure where the whole point of the story is making this one choice. That's not fun, right? That's not the full breadth of what this game and the stories that you're telling could be. Now, if there, as James said, if there's a character that you want to see what choice they'll make, because it's fun to see the player creating this story as they go, then that's totally fine. But I don't want to get into like alignment arguments or the infamous, well, my character would do that, so therefore I'm going to ruin everyone's fun. And that's another problem with these choices, is you're not giving a lot of times a single character. You're trying to give the group a choice, but you're really giving a single character the choice. Because if you give that player and their character agency, one character deciding to do something is making the choice for the whole party. And that makes it a little bit more difficult too. So I try to, in the adventures that I write, stick to, again, a framework for a story. Let the game master pour in more moralistic aspects if they want. But otherwise, try to set up something that everyone could have fun, not just the people who want this moral play to take place.
Sure.
And I mean, you know what? What has occurred to me after listening to James and Shawn both talk is that I think it's just more interesting for the plot and for the characters if their, you know, quote unquote morality clashes aren't against, you know, this broad, unknowable concept of what is and isn't moral. That kind of a clash is so sort of nebulous and vague that it doesn't give me much to go on. I'm like, oh, okay. Whereas if the clashes come between, you know, values of different characters, whether those are NPCs or player characters, if that's where that kind of question comes up, I think that's, I don't know, that's more interesting to me.
Yeah, Dael, you've touched on something really good because in many of the games I play and have run over the past, you know, since college, I've typically played in groups where most of the players are, if not all of the players are queer, including myself. And so, you know, we always have a conversation in our session 0 where it's like, do we want to have a game where like homophobia and the conflicts that can arise because of it are salient in this game world? And I've received all sorts of different responses to that question, even from the same people at different points of their lives and at different tones of gameplay. Because, like, we're all, you know, obviously against homophobia. We're morally opposed to it. But because this is fiction, because this is a safe place for us to kind of explore stories and what ifs, and not just, you know, because we're not just putting ourselves as an avatar into the character, but we're creating a character. The fun can be seeing how will this character, who is, you know, raw and rough-edged in the ways that good, interesting fictional characters are, how will they catch upon the sort of moral sandpaper of the story that we've decided to make? And will that element be a part of it? Or will some other element be a part of it that we want to focus in on this time? And so, yeah, you know, in including something that is morally reprehensible for whatever reason is not inherently a bad thing. It's just a bad thing if it makes the people playing the game unhappy or worried or feel unsafe in the game space that you've created for them.
Yeah, for sure. The players often make me feel unsafe in those.
Are you okay? Yeah. Blink twice if you need help.
Yeah. No, I using a term borrowed from Dael before, I love the shopping trolley problem. Thank you.
And now it's a shopping trolley?
It's a shopping trolley?
Is it not a
No, it's just
a streetcar.
Okay. Wait, no, okay.
That would hurt
Ben,
much
what
less.
What we would call a tram is in this case called a trolley. What we call a trolley is not involved.
Yeah, okay, touche.
You'll just squish 5 tomatoes if you don't switch the track.
I'm gonna mess up some people's toes real bad.
It's just someone rolling down a hill in a Coles trolley. Get out of the way!
And here I thought the dumb thing I said was shoppy trolley.
Shoppy trolley was also very funny.
It took me a moment to realize my mistake there. Yes,
God
okay.
For you, Ben. We got really heavy there for a second, but boy, did you pull us out of it.
I'm glad I did it at a good moment and not a potentially sensitive moment.
I am now making a monster called the animated trolley.
Yeah, great.
It can do a lot of damage.
It affects movement speed because it just bumps over toes. No, I love filling my campaign with morally complex problems such as cars and or trams and or heavy things running over one person as opposed to 5. Because that's, you know, I enjoy exploring that in my game. The one thing that I've learned, and I think I talked about this on a previous episode, was not to judge my players and learned very quickly that everybody has a different definition of morality. I just saw in on the chat, and I'm sorry I missed who it was who said it, but they just mentioned that a cultist was spared by one of their party members, and perhaps actually not sparing the cultist would have been the more morally righteous thing to do. They didn't necessarily extrapolate on the circumstances, but my assumption is that that cultist may go on to do more evil. And I remember in my earliest campaign, this is like one of my earliest memories playing D&D, was a goblin making a deal with the cleric and saying, yes, I will tell you where the Goblin King is if you spare me. And the cleric's like, yeah, absolutely no problem. You can leave. There's a door right here. And the goblin's like, awesome. And the cleric goes, why don't we shake on it? And the goblin goes, okay. And as they shake hands, the cleric says, I cast inflict wounds. And I was like, well, they're making contact, I suppose. Like, I didn't even get him to roll to hit. I was like, yeah, this thing's completely unaware. It just kind of melts where it's standing. But it was this interesting moment where I was like, so the definition of morality is different between people, because I grew up on Batman where like thou shalt not kill under any circumstance, like killing is the ultimate crime. Whereas, other folks hold opinions like, well, if this creature is going to go on and do more evil, it is better to stop it from doing that evil now, even if it is in a defenseless position. So
see, I'll put it this way. I would love to see that happen in a TV show. I think that would be a very powerful character moment.
I would have a hard time thinking of that character as anything other than the villain if I saw that done out in a TV show. I would be hard pressed. But what a character moment.
And if people do immoral things, if people are doing these things, who is judging them? Who is not just judging them, but who is providing the outcome of their actions? In the real world, fate, a divine being. In the game, it's us. So we, as the game master, then get to say what the outcome of this morality is. And so is it really morality, or is it just us either bringing justice, bringing a cool story, right? What are the outcomes of that? Real world morality and morality in a role-playing game are two really separate things because of that. Because we get to say what happens.
Yeah. I guess you're right. I'm thinking of a circumstance from a more recent game which caused like an hour and a half debate between the players, where a character like an NPC had done something reprehensible, but it was kind of already done. So this NPC was an elf. He'd locked himself in a mirror to escape a calamity that he had kind of caused. And so it was, I will escape this calamity by jumping into a mirror and like locking myself in this alternate dimension. Oh no, I can't get out. And he's been trapped there for hundreds of years, and he's gone a little bit nutty. And so it was like, well, the bad thing's already done. There's going to be no consequences to letting him out or leaving him in there. It's just a matter of whether you think he deserves to be let out at this point, whether he deserves to go on and continue to live his best life.
Does he deserve to suffer is, I think, one of the most trenchant moral questions you can pose in any form of media. Yeah. And it's one that I think, depending on what era of media you're watching, you'll see a variety of different answers to. Our view on punishment shifts wildly throughout this culture.
Yeah.
And throughout different cultures throughout the world.
And I mean, all of this discussion, just to briefly touch on alignment, that's a lot to get embroiled in. But, I feel like this is part of why alignment starts to fall apart, right? You've got your, law axis. And where does law have its place in morality? Something can be illegal but moral. Something can be legal and completely immoral. We've seen that multiple times in the real world. And so then you get to the other axis and it's like, I don't know, good and evil. And there's no clarity there, right? Which is where I think the question of morality starts to, I understand the attempt to codify it, but I also understand why that doesn't tend to work.
Sure.
Some people like to replace good and evil with selfish and selfless on their alignment axes, and I'm quite fond of that.
Yeah, I think
same.
As well. Yeah. Just to quickly answer the sort of second part of Brian's question. was balanced.
Similar names, Daniel, Brian.
It's the soft consonant start. In terms of if you do include moral complexity in your campaigns, and you are wanting to balance that out with some levity, and as they kind of term it, the moral escapism that's inherent to role-playing games, my simple answer is every couple of sessions, I just throw them a monster. In the real world, depending on your personal feelings on different things, going out and harming even like a bear that might attack you. The bear's got feelings and a family presumably, but a horrible gribbly monster, an ooze, a fiend, whatever it happens to be, some sort of monstrosity, a basilisk, whatever. Just let them slaughter it. Like, no, this thing doesn't have a family, doesn't have kids, it has somewhere it sleeps, but that's basically it. Feel free, have at it. Just every couple of sessions, throw in those kind of circuit breakers to let them just unleash what they've put on their character sheet. Speaking of unleashing, I'm about to unleash our 3 other hosts because that is the end of the Eldritch Lorecast. I'm going to start
making you a scorecard for transitions. What's the segue this week?
References, transitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what scores highly? Was that a good transition or was that a bad transition?
I quite liked that one, actually. Okay, I'll give you that one.
They're all good.
Shawn's correct.
If you've enjoyed, I hope you've enjoyed listening on the stream and commenting along. Again, it is Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 a.m. Tuesday, Australian Standard Eastern Standard Time. I hope I got all that correct. If you're listening on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify, somewhere else, feel free to give us a rating, give this episode a like, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. It helps the Lorecast get out to more listeners and help us ascend to the number 1 spot that fate has promised us in the D&D multiverse of podcasts. My name is Ben Byrne. I've been here with James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, and we will catch you all again next week. Oh, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com if you want to send us a message.
Good.
The stream saw that. That's kind of embarrassing, isn't it?
That's perfect. They know now.
You mean the whole podcast or just that?
Yeah.